different types of lectures and also teaching modules or something like that, by which you might have been trained, because your theme of this program is genomics assisted crop improvement. Is that so? But I will little bit deviate from that. I will say genomics assisted, marker assisted breeding. And that I will take the model crop, that is brassica, which I am working. And you all know brassica, you are quite familiar with brassica. It's the major oilseed crop of our country, that is Brassica juncea. And lots of varieties have been released over a period of time. And particularly this institute has contributed maximum to the country for giving new varieties. And they are very, very popular varieties, still ruling the roost in the farmer's field. But one thing that I want to tell you, that this first slide you see so many pictures. I am also undertaking little bit of marker aspects in brassica improvement. And in that, we have a field breeding program that you can see here. This is the field breeding program. And we also undertake the in vitro techniques like microspore culture. And I will say that whenever we go on discussing it, where we want to use this microspore culture and why. Why do you need a microspore culture in genetics and also in the breeding, okay? And also some aspect of transgenics that we work. You might have heard about the GM mustard. It must have been there in the news for quite some times. This is nothing but the same GM mustard here. This is from our lab. This is a hybrid DMH11, and which is quite sometimes in the government, the file is there with the government to release it to the environment, because this has been cleared by the Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee. Now this is the government's call to release it to the environment. And we also use genomics, because over a period of time when we started working on the marker, we found that we must have to generate more and more markers. And genomics is the only approach by which you can generate more and more marker. Because certain regions of the genome, where your gene is located, they need to be saturated with marker. How would you do that? You don't have any type of like length polymorphism markers available like SSRs and so any other type of PCR based markers. So you have to switch over to the SNPs so that you can get a large number of markers and saturate a target region from which how you can make use of that in the breeding program. That's why we have a big program on genomics. And let me tell you that I will come to that later on. And of course, marker assisted breeding. And in marker assisted breeding, you might have been exposed to different types of, I think, lectures where you have a foreground marker that you straightforward use it, straightway use it in your breeding program. Instead of looking for the phenotype, you can just look for the genotype of the marker and transfer the trait. But brassica is a very notorious crop. Why I say notorious? Starting from its organization of this genome and the germplasm that you use in case of brassica for the transfer of the trait, every step you find there is problem. So in such a problematic situation, how are you going to undertake marker assisted breeding where you need so many techniques to be used into that? Even if forget about transgenic approach, it's just straightforward, you put a gene and get the trait expression, then it is all these biosafety analysis have to be done. That's a different issue. But as far as marker is concerned, you need so many types of techniques, in vitro techniques, molecular techniques, genomics techniques, all should be there in your hand so that you can effectively transfer a trait very precisely. You might have been exposed to a term like precision plant breeding. how precisely you can transfer a trait. One way is to take a gene and put it into the genome, it becomes most precise. Another is you do the conventional breeding, backcross breeding, trait transfer. But how precisely you can transfer the trait? Why do you need this precise transfer? The first and foremost thing that from where you are transferring the gene, which is your donor parent? Is it an adapted line, or it is a ill-adapted line, or it is from a genetically diverse line that you are using, which might be coming along with the trait, some other gene load of the genome, that means which can lead to a linkage drag. So how to get rid of linkage drag, that is also the another area you have to take into consideration in a situation where the donor parent is a ill-adapted line. And that is the story of Brassica. I am telling you, whatever you want to do with Brassica, it has to be, the donor parent has to be a ill-adapted line, because the traits are present there. In your adapted line or the Indian lines, they are totally exhausted, because we have completely by conventional method exhausted all the variability within that. So any new thing that you want to introduce, it has to come from the ill-adapted germplasm. Germplasms are there, but they are all ill-adapted. Even if today there are some varieties people have released, they are not that good actually. Although they contain the trait, but they have not transferred this trait by the precision breeding. If they would have done the precision breeding, I am pretty sure that this product would have been really the finished product. So, this is the genome. It is a textbook. Things that genome relationship in the Brassica, there are 3 diploid species. One is 2n is equal to 16, that is Brassica nigra. Another is 2n is equal to 18, that is C genome, Brassica oleracea. All your cole crops, all your vegetables, winter vegetables, they belong to this. And the third one is Brassica rapa, which is an oil crop, which 2n is equal to 20. And polyploidization between these 2 diploid species has given rise to 3 different allotetraploid species. This seems to be a little bit simpler. In a triangle form, 3 diploid species and 3 allotetraploid species. But if you really go into details, what is those, the genome complications are there, you will find little bit surprising. But what I will do is it, you are able to see everything here? 10 years back, there was no genomic information available in Brassica. Just 10 years back. Your first plant genome that was sequenced was Arabidopsis, which is a model species, again belong to the Brassicaceae, family Brassicaceae. But first crop species that was sequenced was rice. First, why rice? Rice is a diploid. Genome size is small, around 400 megabase. Whereas Arabidopsis being a model, it's a grass, you can say it, around 120 megabase. But rice is around 400 megabase. And you can see the result today. That was the first crop species which was sequenced. And after lots of informations have been generated and being used in the breeding program. But the first Brassica species, actually, all these 6 Brassica species, you will find it was Brassica rapa that was in 2011. That was sequenced. And after that, it was Brassica oleracea in 2014 and Brassica napus. It was, it's 2000. Yeah, it is also in 2014. But Brassica juncea was the last. Why? It is not an international crop. It is an India-centric crop, rather you can say, because it is only in India Brassica juncea is used as a major oilseed crop. In Europe and Canada and also in some part of the Australia, the Brassica juncea they grow there it is not for oil purpose. It is grown for condiment purpose. You know, for garnishing your salads, they use mustard paste. Okay, so their breeding objective is completely different from the breeding objective that we follow in our country. We always breed for high oil content and which will suit to our environment for the oil purpose. They don't use it for the oil purpose. In fact, they use for the condiments where the oil should be less. Otherwise, it is going to interfere in using them as a mustard paste in the salad, you know, garnishing the salad, all these things. That is why their breeding objective is completely different. I will come to little bit when I go into the details why, what type of things they actually choose in the breeding. But that constitutes a very big germplasm. Whatever this, they are called the East European germplasm. That is why the whole Brassica juncea germplasm, they have been divided into two types. One is Indian types, which is used only for the oil purpose. Another is East European type, which is used for condiments. Okay. And that is why the first sequence of Brassica juncea was from a vegetable type of mustard, that is Tumida. You can see the Tumida. It was sequenced in 2016 by a Chinese group. You know, that sequence was not very good, very bad sequencing. Maybe the Chinese are very, very fast in their publications. They want a good publication to be published in something like Nature Genetics or Nature Biotechnology or something like that. It was a badly assembled genome. And since it is a vegetable type, so then we took up Indian varieties Baruna, which is the most popular variety in this country, to sequence it. And now we have this draft sequence with us, which has been communicated, and hopefully it is going to be accepted, which is, the fidelity is much high. I will come to that a little bit. And at the same time, we have also sequenced Indian Brassica nigra. Okay, that's the Sangam variety, it is being used, because nigra has a problem. Nigra is self-incompatible. So making an inbred line in nigra is very, very difficult. When it is self-incompatible, you cannot maintain it by selfing. You know, so what we did was, we took this Brassica nigra, then applied it in microspore culture for generating a double haploid population that becomes completely homozygous. You know that just a parent, one parent, you just make double haploid from that. Okay, so when you make a double haploid from that, then become a completely, one plant that was homozygous. Okay, that is completely homozygous, use it for sequencing purpose, that's it. But subsequently that homozygous plant could not be maintained. Because how to maintain it? You have to maintain it by selfing. जितना बार भी कोशिश कर लो आप selfing करने के लिए, no, you will not be able to get any seeds from that. Even if you do bud pollination, even if you do the embryo rescue, it's a very Herculean task even to do that, because when you are undertaking so much of work in other areas, just to maintain a particular line in homozygous condition, it becomes very difficult actually. You cannot divert your resources, limited resources for that type of work, you know. But anyway, we got double haploid generated from this particular variety and used it for sequencing purpose. So that helped us. We made a map, genetic map, involving Tumida into Baruna. Then another Juncea map, which is between the two different varieties of Brassica juncea, that is Baruna and another variety. That map, there are 3 maps were used to assemble the genome of Baruna. And that gave us a very high fidelity sequence, which can be now used as a reference genome of Brassica juncea. And similarly, we are in the process of sequencing Brassica carinata also. Just made a, because carinata can be selfed. It is not self-incompatible. So you can make a homozygous line and cross it. So this is, the complexity comes next. This is where I have just compared two different genomes, two polyploid genomes. One is hexaploid wheat, another is brassica. Hexaploid wheat, you all know how this has been A, B and D genome. First A and B, they came together, allopolyploid. Then again with that, the D genome was crossed. Of course, naturally, then you get ABD genome. But when you come to the brassica, do you know brassica is a hexaploid? It is a hexaploid. You might have so far might have been you might have been taught that it is allotetraploid as far as genome is concerned. But you see, this is the brassical. The ancestor of brassica, it has undergone triplication, from which this is the evolution process. Then you have got, from that you have got the C genome coming, A genome coming and B genome coming. So each one is having three copies of each genome. Then after that you have got brassica juncea, brassica napus and brassica carinata. Again AABB, AACC and BBCC. That means 3 copies here and 2 copies there ultimately has given it's a hexaploid. And when you see that you want to do the genome sequencing of a hexaploid, you know why wheat sequencing was, draft sequence of the wheat was so late? Because of this complexity. And this is also one of the reasons why brassica took such a long time for sequencing. When there are 6 copies of the same gene is present in the genome, and with the new generation of the next generation of sequencing method, that we know that you make small beads, make them into contigs by bioinformatics search, and subsequently ultimately make the pseudochromosomes, and that is what. And if there are 6 copies are moving around, there is every possibility that the gene 1 and the other copy of the same gene, they can be, which is present at the paralogous region, they can be put together into a single contig. That possibility, that probability is high in that case. So what you need to know is that, need a background information is that if a linkage map is available, with high density linkage map is available with the markers, that is not going to fail you, because that will give you the order in each chromosome or each linkage group, what are the genes are there. So if you can get a backup of that and align your small bead of sequences, you will be more efficiently put them into a single chromosome and subsequently do the draft sequence ready. Okay, if you don't have any linkage map, then it will lead to misassembly. There is no doubt, and that was what happened in case of Tumida actually. Okay, so this is one step of complications. As usual, in all the crop plants, you have yield increase is one of the major objectives. Always increase the yield by, if it is a predominantly self-pollinated crop, you go by pure line breeding methods, or you can go for the hybrids even. If you have cytoplasmic male sterility or any type of pollination control mechanism available, then you can do that. Hybrids and improvement of quality. What quality you can think about a oil crop? I can imagine about rice and wheat, cooking quality, elongation of the grains, all sorts of things, basmati quality, all sorts of things in case of rice you can think of. But in oil, it is the most important is the fatty acid composition of the oil, health oil. Okay, that is one aspect. And second is, after you extract the oil, you are left with so much of oil cakes in oil crops. When mustard is the important oil crop, it is cultivated around 6 to 7 million hectares of land in this country. So we consume mustard oil and simultaneously we accumulate oil cake. Around more than 60% of your output is oil cake. And what are we doing with this oil cake at the moment? You know, it is very high protein rich, but cannot be used. It could have been a good feed for the livestock or could be poultry, provided it is devoid of a particular secondary metabolites, that is glucosinolate. You know, when you extract the oil, more than 99% of your glucosinolate, you know, this mustard oil is pungent. Why it is pungent? It is due to this secondary metabolite, broken down product of this glucosinolate, sulfur containing glucosinolate, that gives you pungency. Only less than 1% of this glucosinolate oil that come into the oil, that gives you pungency. Remaining more than 99% of this glucosinolate, they remain in the oil cake. And because of this, it cannot be used as a livestock feed or a poultry feed. So somehow we have to bring it down so that it could be a very good protein rich feed. And that means you have to make this mustard oil which is of 00. One is low in glucosinolate, another is fatty acid in the oil. The oil of the mustard that is grown in our country, it contains 50%, nearly 50% of the fatty acid, 20 to 1. 22 carbon is to 1. Okay, that is erucic acid. And erucic acid is undesirable fatty acid. I will not say it is harmful, but it has been shown with feeding assay with high concentration of it, it shows myocardial disturbances. Okay, so in all these Western countries, they have completely made it free of erucic acid because they are more health conscious than us. Because a lot of debate has gone into it. Say, okay, for the ages, barson se sarson, it is a primitive to us, to our country, and we have been consuming it. But nothing has happened to us. To be very frank, even if you consume erucic acid throughout your life, it will not be harmful to you. Because the amount of erucic acid that has been fed to the experimental animal is much higher than that. But why to take a compound that is undesirable? Erucic acid. And if you can reduce the erucic acid, you will find it gives you a better fatty acid composition. I will come to that little bit later. So that is another aspect to make the oilseed mustard 00 quality or canola quality, because all these Brassica napus that are grown in Canada and Europe, they are all of canola quality. Rapeseed. They are called the rapeseed. In India, Brassica juncea is mustard. And of course, disease resistance. That is, for any breeding objectives, you need to stabilize the yield. There can be disease at any point of time, it can attack and become epidemic. So in that case, there are three major diseases in mustard. One is white rust resistance, you need to breed for that. Alternaria, leaf spot, Alternaria brassicae, that is Alternaria spots, you will find at the time of after flowering it will come, or just before the flowering it will come. And third one is your stem rot, that is Sclerotinia, stem rot, it comes. And these three are very devastating diseases. Unfortunately, we have resistant source available in Brassica germplasm for white rust. But to be very frank with you, not a single Indian varieties so far available which are so popular in the farmer's field are resistant to white rust. And its genetics is very simple, single dominant gene, white rust resistance. You could have pyramided it. You could have transferred it. But then why we have not been able to do it? I will come to next slide. The reason is, if we see, this is the Indian germplasm. Okay? They are so narrow in their genetic diversity. You know, what we have done so far in our country by breeding of mustard is that we have made the crosses among the good into good, adapted into adapted crosses. So whatever the variability that was there in that dispersed, we have accumulated, and that's why they form a very compact gene pool, very compact gene pool. So it needs to be augmented with genes from the outside. And we have another, gene pool. That means this is totally divided into two gene pool, the whole germplasm divided into two gene pool. And although you will find little bit of more variability in that, but it is not a oil crop. East European gene pool, they are used for condiments. But if you see the characters that can be transferred from this gene pool to this gene pool, you see all the quality traits, it comes from East European gene pool, it need to be transferred. Seed coat color is also another good trait that need to be transferred from East European to Indian, and you can see there are many such characters that need to be transferred. We have tried in making the crosses, but whenever you make a cross with this, you don't get good segregant because it is illy adapted. Very tall, very late in flowering, lot many bad characters are there in this gene pool. That's why, and they also contain genes for white rust resistance. We have not been able to transfer it, although it is controlled by one gene. Even if in the today's scenario, not a single variety till today they are white rust resistance in mustard. Because the donor source is available only here. You have to transfer it very precisely without any linkage drag to this. How would you do that? That is the question. That is what I am going to discuss a little bit, how we have tackled this one. Okay? But another point that needs to be, when you make a cross between Indian into East European, the F1 is highly heterotic. F1 is highly heterotic. That we have seen. You just put CMS in one gene pool line and the restorers in other gene pool line, you can make hybrids. And following this rationale, we have developed some hybrids. I am just going to little bit touch about it. There are 3 CMS based hybrid that are still under cultivation. This has been already released by ICAR, others are not released, but their seed companies, they are taking the seeds from us, they are marketing it. And this one is pollination control mechanism is Barnage Barster, which is GM based, and that is still lying in the shelf, although it has been cleared by the. So I will not go into this, I will go in depth into the marker assisted breeding, how we are making use of genomics information in our breeding program for undertaking a precision transfer of the trait from the East European line to the Indian line. Anything that you want to do, transfer, you must know the genetics of that particular trait. I have seen many such projects people have written, and when they come for the defense, the first question I have asked them, do you know the genetics of this trait? No. Blank. I want to do QTL mapping, I want to do this and that. Unless and until you know how it is segregating in a segregating population, how many genes control this particular trait, how are you going to adapt a technique? So what type of technique that you want to adapt to transfer the trait or to dissect that particular trait? So that is a foremost requirement, rather I would say, as a student. We are mostly from the genetics and plant breeding background. So never ever forget to study the genetics. You don't need to do much because there are many of such crops, such plants, they are homozygous, pure lines are available. if the contrast is there for the trait, make a cross in the F2, just gather any information about the whether it is a qualitative trait or it is a quantitative trait. If it is a qualitative trait, you can even estimate number of genes controlling this particular character. Quantitative, you may not in the first go do that. You need to have to dissect that particular trait by using a mapping population or something like that. Then after that, you should be able to tell many things about that particular trait. But ascertain the genetics of that. Like I have just jotted down 4 different characters here. Erucic acid controlled by 2 genes, 2 recessive genes. Glucosinolate, low glucosinolate, that is the desirable alleles or the trait that you need to make your plant low glucosinolate. It is controlled by 5 recessive genes. So everything recessive. And yellow seed coat color, again 2 recessive genes. But white rust resistance, it is controlled by 1 dominant gene. But there are independent sources of resistance available in Brassica juncea germplasm. So what we decided that if you want to precisely transfer this trait, you need marker assisted backcross breeding. Whenever the number of genes are low controlling that particular character, like 1 or 2 genes, you can do it straightforward by marker assisted backcross breeding. But when we come to like glucosinolate, why it is controlled by so many genes? It's a pathway genes. If you see the Arabidopsis pathway of glucosinolate biosynthesis, you will find it's a network pathway. Different types of aliphatic glucosinolates are there. One is C3 carbon, another is C4 carbon, C5 carbon, all sorts of chain elongation, modifications, all sorts of pathways. There are not many genes are involved in the pathway. So in that case, your natural germplasm, if you do a genetic analysis, you will find 5 to 6 genes controlling the low glucose. Ultimately, the phenotype will be C3 plus C4 plus C5. That becomes the low glucosinolate. But individually, you will have C3, C4, and C5. So you must have a facility for doing these analysis in your lab, which you need a HPLC should be there so that you can fractionate into C3, C4, and C5 glucosinolate, and then ultimately do the genetics of that particular character. We did first established how we came to 5 genes. This itself is a Herculean task. I tell you why. Okay, so this is what I want to say is that if you want to transfer a trait, you must know the genetics. This is the major concern, as I have already told you, that East European lines are ill adapted to Indian conditions. Okay, hence no recombination or pure line breeding has been successful in the cross between Indian and the East European gene pool lines because it never gives you a good recombinant. That means due to the presence of linkage drag, your gene must be positive. It could be desirable alleles, but along with that surrounding area, it might have contained some undesirable genes. That is what it leads to the linkage drag. And you are transferring it by recombination. Where the recombination has taken place, that you do not know. If you can ascertain that, then you can do a precision breeding. I want a recombination between the gene and the very nearest marker, if it is located. I can screen for that, a large population, if you can do that. Then your donor genome contribution to the introgressed line or the near isogenic line that you make at the end of the day, it should have least amount of donor genome. Only the gene of interest and little bit of it. That is what our objective should have been if you want to transfer any gene from an unadapted line to the adapted variety. Okay, so remedy is introgression of trait without linkage drag. That you need to do it. So for that purpose, how can you do that? Genetic analysis and mapping. First, find out where that gene is located. By genetic mapping you can do it. Second is integration through precision marker assisted backcross. Precision marker assisted backcross. That is most important. How would you do that? We will be discussing. So we 1 baj gaya. When did you start? 12:30? Can we continue up to 1:30? Okay. So if you want to transfer it just a precision breeding method, then the target region must be saturated with markers. Okay, so that's why prerequisite is a saturation map of the target region. How would you saturate it? With a large number of markers. कहाँ से मिलेगा आपको? ये SSR ये तो नहीं चलेगा, ये तो they can give you a sparse map. So there you need the input of the genomics into it, where you can identify SNPs in millions, then subsequently map them to the target region, how many SNPs are. I will show you some example how you can do it. Okay. This is just a general slide, how you can, get genomics and the genetics together. Genomics methods can generate millions of SNPs, whether it is by the genome sequencing or by the transcriptome sequencing. There are different methods by which you can do all these things and generate the database for the SNPs. And in the genetics area, you can make the mapping population. One is either a diversity panel to be used in the association mapping. Another is you can make the biparental populations. In our program, I never rely on single biparental population, because there are many traits that are present in different parents. You can make a biparental population between two, but you might need the input from the different biparental population to come to a conclusion that actually how many loci that might be controlling that quantitative trait. So in that case, I always make use of biparental population. You can ask me the questions, why not use this association mapping? Because it takes care of the whole germplasm into consideration, is not it? Association mapping, one of the most important limitation of association mapping, your population should not be structured. And when you are using your germplasm is divided into two different groups. One is East European type, another is Indian types. It is already, K value is equal to 2 only, highly structured. In highly structured population, if you undertake a association mapping, it will lead to false positive. Although there are statistical methods, they have been little bit, improved by accommodating some of these K factors, but it is still not free from error. It can lead to many, the lower the K value, higher is the error. That's why we prefer not to go for the germplasm based association mapping, rather than go for several biparental population and do the genetic analysis for that. For qualitative and the quantitative trait, you can make a SNP platform, and from that you can do the foreground selection, you can do background selection, integration breeding, and here trait mapping, qualitative and the quantitative, fine mapping of the genes, identification, and integration breeding. This is a general slide that as a student of genetics or the plant breeding, if you want to bring the genomics assisted crop improvement, want to follow it, then this is the general method. And for the purpose, you see, these are the different biparental population that we have been handling in our program. 8 different biparental, and they are contrasting for many traits, and many traits could be mapped simultaneously. And if you, for certain traits, you can use 4 or 5 biparental population, certain traits you can even take all the 8 population, depending on how contrast those traits are, that you can decide as a geneticist or the breeder. So this is our program, 8 different biparental population that we are handling. And now coming to saturation of the target regions or the QTL region. you need the SNP information from all the different parents that you are using in your biparental population. So we have taken, this is the reference genome of Varuna, which has been sequenced with a high fidelity, and all the other parents that are used in our breeding program, they have been by Illumina sequencing. It is with low, 20x, 40x, we have done it. And we have generated the SNP database. And those SNP database is used in our breeding program as a breeding chip. This is about to be ready, and then you can handle so many traits simultaneously to undertake not the speed breeding or the subtle breeding, but marker assisted backcross breeding by using so much of. This is just to give you information about how we have done this Varuna genome sequencing. If you just see here, this is the Tumida. Okay, N50 value is so low, whereas this Varuna genome, it is very high. You can see the fidelity, like assembly size. Okay, this is Varuna and this is Tumida. This is this much, this is this much as compared to the Tumida which was done, and there was lot many gaps in case of Tumida genome sequencing, and here this is much better. This is the high fidelity, and what you can see is that we are even sequenced the telomere to telomere in certain chromosomes, complete. Like take for example this one, this chromosome. This is telomere to telomere. That means there is no more regions, genomic region left in this particular chromosome where you need to, you have not covered. Okay. Similarly, some of these chromosomes like this one in the B genome and some in the A genome. Of course, there are still some gaps. Terminal region have not been sequenced, because when you are doing it for this shotgun sequencing or what you do the next generation sequencing, there is always gap, little bit remains. But most important thing in sequencing is that your sequence assembly, making the contigs and the pseudochromosome, they should not, there should not be misassembly in that. That you must be very careful. That is where you can compare this. You see, this is one chromosome, this is Tumida, this is Varuna. Okay, is it so? You see how much of misassembly it was earlier there, now it has been here also. That is where, and this paper has been communicated. Hopefully within next 15 days it will be accepted, because now it is, the revision has gone to this Nature plant.
Why we are telling that is gap, sir? Why we are telling that is gap? So on what basis?
This is,
Short chromosomes are there.
this is the centromeric region. Okay. Always what we find is repeated sequences that comes on both the sides, and sequencing by the shotgun method, those repeated sequences, it is very difficult. You cannot get the actual sequence of those regions, so it will remain. We are not interested in repeated sequences, so we are mostly interested in the genic sequences. So in that case, most of your information will be there. Okay, that is the problem with, if you do a back end sequencing, like whole chromosome has been fragmented into different backs, then you do the back sequencing, then you should be able to do that. But that is very, very cost intensive, and you need to do a Sanger sequencing method, all sorts of things. It is very expensive, you can't do that. Okay, in a small lab like that, ours, or even if in a lab, moderate lab like your AKC, they will not be even able to do that. It will be difficult to do, because you have to make a back library, make the contigs of the backs, then subsequently sequence each backs, subclone them into small sequence, and jodte jao. Okay, so that's going to take a long time. Initial sequencing, Rice was done by that method, because that's why they involved so many groups from India was also involved in that, and It's an international consortium, they did that. But this is simply from one lab. Now is 1,000 genome sequencing. Our interest is to generate more SNPs. The only thing that we want to see that depending on the complexity of the genome, we should not generate, you should generate only allelic SNP. If the same gene is present in 3 or 4 or 5 places, that you are not matching the gene of that particular region with your gene and saying that this is allelic. It is not, it is a paralogous SNP or non-homologous SNP. It should not be. It has to be allelic SNP. That is the only region, and that is the only criteria that you have to see, that whatever SNP that you are determining, there are of course bioinformatics methods are there, search are there, softwares are available to do this, but you have to also apply your mind as a bioinformatics how to separate the non-allelic SNP from the allelic SNP. Okay, so little bit of homework you have to do on that, but this is what I want to give you. And this is how the 3 genomes of Brassica, A, B and C genome. This is B genome, this is A genome. You know, your B genome is, you all know the B genome is extremely diverse from A and B genome, A and C genome. Okay, yes, there are 22,000 B genome specific genes which are not present in the A genome, not even in the C genome, and out of which nearly 12,000 genes are transcriptionally active. That means B genome specific. So that, you know, put you into a question where it has come, from where it has come. It is only B genome specific. Although they have come from a common ancestor after trigenic method, that triple genome, they have been diversed into 3 different genomes. How the B genome has accumulated so much of new genes which are neither present in A genome nor in the C genome. Was a 4th genome involved in giving even the B genome? All sorts of questions you can ask and try to answer by designing a proper experiment. It is just in finding at the moment that we are saying that this has got 22,000 genes which are specific to the B genome. Then subsequently somebody will, or maybe we will come out how, whether a 4th genome has been involved or not. Okay. Now, since I have given you the biparental, 8 different biparental population, these are the, Boruna is the reference genome, and these are the genomes, Brassica juncea, they have been sequenced by low pass, 40x. It is only to generate the SNPs so that we can develop a breeding chip for foreground selection and for background selection. That is the objective. The database has been generated. Now it has to be, a chip has to be developed. Okay. First, now I will come to the different characters, how we tagged it. Okay, this is first character, that is low erucic acid. This is the FAU1 gene which is responsible for converting the oleic acid to erucic acid, elongage gene. If you can find a polymorphism in this particular gene, and there are 2 genes control this, that means one is located in the A genome, another is located in the B genome. If you can find a polymorphism in the candidate gene, that can act as a marker, foreground selection marker. That is exactly what we did only from the candidate. This is known in case of Arabidopsis, other Brassica species, this has been identified that FAU1 is the candidate gene for the elongation of oleic acid to erucic acid. This is 18-1 carbon to 22 carbon. Okay, elongation. And we have mapped it. This is your erucic acid, QTL, because it can be estimated as a quantitative value, erucic acid. You cannot do it erucic acid present or absent. Okay, it has to be quantitatively. That's why you need a QTL mapping to be done for the trait. But your candidate gene is FI. This is in B7, one is in A8, and they perfectly coincide. And these are the SNPs that you find. Is it okay? Are you able to see it? Yes. Okay. So there are 4 SNPs in gene 1 and 3 SNPs in the gene 2. You can make use of these SNPs and do the marker-assisted breeding just following the foreground selection. Now coming to the how complicated the glucosinolate pathway is. This is C3 pathway, this is C4, this is C5. And there are many genes starting from here. MIP28 is also involved, and there are many genes they are involved in this pathway. And that is where I can tell you what is the problem with the genetics of this one. The genetics of the glucosinolate is, it is a highly heritable trait. The reason being that it is a pathway, genes of the pathway, molecular pathway, secondary metabolites, and there you will not find any environmental effect affecting the trait to that extent. That is why it is highly heritable. And I said it is controlled by 5 to 6 genes. At the beginning we didn't know actually it is 5 or the 6. But ultimately we found it is just 6 genes, but 2 of the genes are very tightly linked. Very tightly linked. I will come to that a little bit later. And the trait shows maternal effect. The molecules are synthesized at the vegetative stage. Only in the seed they are transported. There is no biosynthesis of glucosinolate in the seeds. That is why it gives you maternal effect. That means if you want to do breeding with the low glucosinolate, you cannot do it from the F2 seeds. You have to go to the F3 seeds. That will give you the actual genotype of the F2 plant. Okay, and exhibit context dependency. You know what is, have you heard about context dependency? As a genetic student? No. Context dependency means allelic heterogeneity. That means if it is controlled by many genes in a biochemical pathway, network pathway, and if you want to transfer the trait to a new genetic background, when you change gradually the genetic background, that means your context is changing. One genetic background to the other, your context is changing, and your allelic effect, which you detected first, they may not be the ultimate gene for controlling this trait. There is, it will change. How it is going to change? How did we find out that context dependency is playing an important role? And if you want to tackle this maternal effect, and trait is controlled by 5 recessive genes, I told you in the beginning, low glucosinolate is recessive in expression and exhibit context dependency. How would you tackle this transfer of the trait? This is a major question that you can ask. Why DH is preferred here? Double haploid. We made use of double haploid. Due to the absence of heterozygotes, segregation ratios are simpler. What do we do? When you make a double haploid, you do it from either gynogenic double haploid or androgenic double haploid. In Brassica, we follow microspore culture. That means androgenic haploids. Okay? And a gene, suppose you made a cross between 2 pure lines, capital A, small a, small a. F1 becomes capital A, small a, heterozygote. It will divide, gametes are going to be 2 types, capital A and small a. Catch that. That is the, you can get the gametes from the male side and you fix it and make a double haploid. So your segregation will be half. Ratio will be for a gene, segregation as compared to an F2, which will be 1/4 of your recessive homozygote. Here half. And half for the recessive homozygote, then its segregation ratio is much simpler, resulting in high frequency of recessive homozygotes. Half to the power n. If number of genes are n, that is controlling half, suppose 4 genes, half into half into half into half. 6 genes, 6 times. Whereas in case of a zygote, if you go 1/4 to the power n. So your population size that will be required will be enormously big to get one individual having recessive alleles in the homozygous condition. Is not it? That is where we prefer to go for the double haploid. And no interference of dominance and the associated interaction, because we are only taking homozygous lines. So no dominance or its interaction will be there. Much simpler genetics. An ideal population for gene tagging through bulk segregant analysis. You all know bulk segregant analysis. Why people prefer a RIL over the F2 population for doing bulk segregant analysis? कभी कोई बताया आपको? Because your heterozygotes are not there, it will be much cleaner segregation that we will find when you make a bulk of one type of genotype, other type of genotype. You are cleaner. Okay?
So, if you go for the genotyping in the F2 derived F3,
F2 derived F3.
that problem can be solved.
But F3 you will also find if
No, sir, genotyping in the F2 derived F3
Uh-huh.
and phenotyping in the F2, we will get the heterozygous which is segregating. This family of
no, you will get the segregation, but when you do a bulk segregant analysis, what I am talking is, if you want to do a bulk segregant analysis, your reals will be much cleaner population to bulk rather than the F2 or F2 derived F3, or not? You answer this question. I think it will be much cleaner to use a reals, because there will be no interference of heterozygote in a reel. It will be either capital A, or it is a small a, small a. If there is a heterozygote, it will be capital A, small a. Two bands can come. So that is where the problem could arise. So that is my whole answer is. Okay. So saves times and generation for the identification of recessive homozygote, hence it is more efficient for the integration. Traits showing maternal effect could also be handled. There will be no maternal effect if you are taking from the microspores and making a double haploid. No question of any maternal effect. In same generation, you should be able to identify. Don't have to go for the F3 seeds, but you can do it in the F2 seeds itself, F2 or the DH population itself. You can do it straightforward. You will save the time, you will also save the generation, and you will have a cleaner picture if you want to use the DH. That's why we followed it. We transferred this trait. This is a donor parent, which is a East European type again, and Indian type Varuna we used. BC3 DH, BC2 DH, BC1 DH, F1 DH, BC4 DH, BC5. So many generations we went on transferring, and always picked up a low glucosinolate and backcross it to the high glucosinolate. Varuna, the same parent. We transferred it, the trait, to the Varuna type. But what we found was it was not as productive as that of Varuna, because 5-6 different chromosomal regions they are going and giving you low glucosinolate. That means it is taking a large part of the genome from the donor genome, because 5 different or 6 different loci, their surrounding region, they have been pulled together. So that gives not a productive line. But this gave us an enormous genetic stocks to do the genetic analysis and find out exactly what gene is. So to cut the long story short, what I will do is how we did the fine mapping of those genes and how did we narrow it down. Narrow it down I will tell you, but how did we do the fine mapping? We know the candidate genes in Arabidopsis. Using those, then we did the fine mapping of the genes and found out where the QTLs are. But how to first find out the context dependency? I will just give you a picture this. I did the QTL analysis of first generation. This is the first generation, F1DH. It is a segregating population. Okay, all homozygous, and it will segregate for capital A and small a. And I took BC4DH, advanced generation backcross. Okay, this is called recurrent selection backcross method. Recurrent selection, always select for the phenotype and give the backcross to the recurrent parent. Okay, so BC4DH, I did the QTL analysis for this trait, compared the QTLs of F1DH and that of BC4DH. What result I got? This is the result of F1DH. Here you have a QTL, here you have a QTL 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, F1DH. But when you compare the QTL analysis, you went on giving backcrosses and pick up the BC4DH after 4 generation of backcrossing. You get a picture like this. This was not there in the F1DH, now it appeared after 4 generation of backcrossing. This is a QTL that is totally controlled due to context dependency. That means if you would have taken the F1DH information for transfer of the trait, you would not have been able to transfer the trait, because this QTL you would not have considered for transfer. Now after 4 backcrosses, you could really identify the true QTL. This was there, this was there, this disappeared, this QTL. This became more prominent. That is what is called the allelic heterogeneity. Okay. This was not there, this was not there, this disappeared, this was there. New QTL here, B1 and B3. Okay, so this is the true picture. If I have to transfer this trait, I will concentrate on from the low glucosinolate to the Indian types. I will take this one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. Now you proved how many loci you need. That is why I told in the beginning it could be 5 to 6 genes. Okay, now you can map your candidate genes, because you know in the Arabidopsis pathway what are the candidate genes in glucosinolate pathway, and map them. Are they coinciding with the same QTL? Then take a big segregating population and validate it by genetic method. No, don't go for genomics approach like transgenic or something like that. You cannot do a transgenic approach for this particular pathway genes, because if you change one, the other pathway genes, they will take over. Phenotype will be different. So it is better to do it by the genetics method. Okay, so that is where the context dependence.
What is the reason for the context dependencies?
We are transferring the trait from an East European line to the Indian variety. I have shown you the pathway. Look, just a minute. Oh, I am going forward. Here you see how the context is. Indian varieties, they are rich in C3 and C4 both. East European varieties, they are only rich in this particular. So the glucosinolate, the context of glucosinolate, one type of glucosinolate is present in East European type, whereas in Indian type it is different types of glucosinolate. And the genome of Indian types are different from that of, because as I told you in the beginning, they are the two different diverse gene pool. So when you change the gene, the equilibrium that they were maintaining under a particular gene pool, when you want to change it by backcross breeding, then your equilibrium is getting disturbed and new equilibrium are getting created. That is what is called the context changing, and the genes that were there in the first case where both the genes were interacting. After that, it is only one genome is coming, Indian types of genome. So context is changing completely with the increase in the backcrosses. That is where your whole of your allelic setup, they are going to be disturbed. That is what is called the context dependency. Okay. And these are the 3-4 different genes in the Indian background. Indian lines 3C, 4C and 5C all are present, whereas in the East European type it is only 3C. And here these are the two genes, they are responsible and here these are the 4 genes. This much of complexity. And one of the genes that you will see in the A3, there are 2 genes here. Elongase and also total glucosinolate. Okay, I will come to the later on and a little bit later. So this is how. But one thing again, if you take these 4 genes in the Indian background, it will make your plant low glucosinolate. You might not need this one. You don't need this one to make the low glucosinolate. Here, these are the 2 genes that is very important. Okay, and here you don't need this one, and here you need this one. It's a must here. Suppose you tomorrow make a cross between these 2. What is going to happen? This could be low, this could be low in its own background. But when you make a cross in the F1, you will find high glucosinolate. That is because this was wild type, but this was mutant one. Complementation is going to take place in the F1. So whenever you want to breed, suppose tomorrow, as I told you in the beginning, that cross between this one and this one is heterotic. Now tomorrow you want to make a low glucosinolate hybrid by making cross between these and these. How are you going to make it? If here it is controlled by some other genes, here it is controlled by some other genes. So you have to be very careful when you make a low glucosinolate. All of them 5 should be low. Here also all of them should be low. Then your hybrids are going to be low in glucosinolate. Otherwise there will be complementation. That is what we observed. This was 5.6 micromole, only very low. The other parent was again 5.3, but the F1 was 27 micromole glucosinolate. That is what is happening. Again, another cross, 10.6, 5.3. It gave rise to 34.4. This is invariably you will find many people they have encountered this type of problem. Low crossed with low give you high. How it is possible? This is the explanation I am telling you. Complementation is taking place because in one background you have a set of genes that is required, another background, another set of genes that is required, and when you make a cross, you get this type of things. So the best way to breed for low glucosinolate is all the genes should be low alleles, so that there is no problem. And we have also tagged the seed coat color. First we did it by, I will now fast forward by the SSR markers. Then subsequently we found out by fine mapping what are the candidate genes. And it was found out to be TT8 genes. In the proanthocyanidin pathway, TT8 gene, which is a regulatory gene actually, transcription factor that is controlling this one in both A9 and also B3, TT8. Okay, we isolated and we made the markers, gene-based markers. Okay, so you can straight away make gene-based markers. Like glucosinolate, we did the gene-based marker. Erucic acid, we did this one also. And we have also done the gene-based, developed the gene-based marker for the 3 different sources of white rust resistance. There are 3 independent sources. What I am going to tell you that is a single gene in each one, but they are different. One is located in the A4, another is located in A5, A6. If you pyramid all of these into one, then you should be getting durable resistance for the white rust. There are many such sources of white rust resistance available in Brassica jonesii, but since it is located, all of the donor sources are on ill-adapted germplasm. Tumida here, Donskaja here, Hira here, ill-adapted. So you have to do a precision marker assisted breeding to transfer this. This one is in progress, candidate genes. We have not been able to, that's why we have linked markers. We know the candidate genes here. We also know the candidate genes here. Okay. Marker assisted breeding. What is the basic requirement? You know that if you are transferring it from the ill-adapted, you have to do a precision breeding. Basic requirement, foreground selection marker preferably be from the candidate genes. I have tagged so many characters, almost all of them are with the candidate gene markers. So you can just need one marker for the candidate gene. That will suffice for the foreground selection. And second is a saturated map of the target region. Okay, and the third one is a large segregating population for identification of recombinant, fine recombinant. These are the three requirements if your donor source is ill-adapted line. This is how you saturate the target. This is one target region, this is another target region, another target region with so many markers in that region. So you can look for a recombinant or double recombinant. How would you look for it? That we'll discuss. There are actually two methods available. One is two generations. In the first generation, you look for a recombination in one side of the gene. Suppose your gene is located here. Okay, one side. Second generation, single recombinant you identify. And in the second generation, you look for the second recombination in the other side of the gene. This is what is called the two generation single recombinant strategy. But we follow this one. That means overlapping recombinant identification. How you do it? You take a big segregating population. One plant have a recombination in one side of the gene. The other plant should have a recombination in other side of the gene. Make the cross between the two, and in the F2 you should be able to identify double recombinant, fine double recombinant with high frequency. That is exactly how you will get. This is how we did the R1 and R2 for the many genes, and this is how you can pick up type 1 double recombinant. Very nicely you can pick up from making the cross between R1 into R2, F1, then F2. They are the gametes they are going to make, and you can have one is double recombinant chromosome, other is single, one more generation, or make the cross between these two types. You will be able to recover these two chromosomes together. This is how we did for all the traits that we have transferred. Okay? And here you also need make use of double haploid. Pyramiding. Like I told you that 5 genes for the glucosinolate, 2 genes for the erucic acid if you want to make, 7 genes. What should be your population size if you go through the F2 method? 7 genes will require 16,384 to get one plant that will be double low, which is not possible. You have to do the GC analysis, you have to do HPLC analysis of so many plants, then you will be able to identify one theoretically. But if you do it by the DH method, it will be 1 by 128. Okay, so that is where the application of DH is. High frequency of recessive homozygote, as most of the characters are recessive in expression. And we have around 200 double haploid lines at the moment. And hopefully we should be able to nominate this to the ICR trials next year. Okay. Similarly for the white rust resistance, we have transferred the 2 genes actually, not the 3 genes that I have shown, 2 genes. One is in A4, another is in A5, and by doing this marker assisted transfer, we have transferred it, and we have got around 121 white rust resistance nils with us in different backgrounds, that is in Baruna, Pusa Bold, Rohini, and Pusa Jai Kisan. These are the 4 very important varieties in our country. This is from IRI, this is also from IRI, this is from Kanpur, and this one is from, I think, Hisar, Rohini. Okay? Not Hisar? I don't know exactly. Okay? Whatever it is, we don't have any variety with us. We are trying to make all the popular Indian variety, convert them into either resistance to the white rust or make them 00. Okay? These are they have been nominated to ICR trial, you see. Baruna with white rust, 2 genes of white rust resistance. This yield potential is more or less same oil content, test weight, and the days to flower. So unless and until what I want to tell you that if you don't sufficient backcross or narrow down the recombinant very close to it, you will not be able to recover the whole potential of your donor parent. This is the donor parent and this is the nil. This is the donor parent, this is the nil. This is the donor parent, this is the nil, and this and this. This is what we have done so far, and hopefully in another 1 or 2 years some of the products we'll see. And in fact, these have already been given to the private seed companies. We have already handed over. This year we have put it to the iShare trial. Okay. We have also done a lot of QTL analysis for important traits by using multiple biparental population. Sorry, in another 5 minutes. Okay. The advantage of multiple biparental population is that you can identify the allelic status of different parents that are used in so many biparental population. Like I have shown the status of alleles. Pusa Jai Kisan, this is Donskaja, this is TM4, this is Baruna, this is EH2, and this is Hira. You know, like this, if you use many biparental population and they are linked, one of the parents would be linked. Then you can make a network type of things, and allelic status could be determined. This will tell you which parent for the which QTL you should use that particular QTL for the transfer. Which will be the here Pusa Jai Kisan should be taken as a donor parent. Here also Pusa Jai Kisan for seed weight, because it is the boldest seed in our germplasm, Pusa Jai Kisan. And for this QTL it is Baruna, Baruna, Baruna. And somewhere you will find they are equal. So you can take a decision which one you want to take for different QTL if you want to pyramid all of them. Similarly, kahan chala gaya? Okay, what is this? Anyway, forget about this slide. This is about the oil content. We have identified the pleiotropic QTL. In the sense, pleiotropic QTL misguide you if you want to do the marker assisted breeding. Because pleiotropy means one trait is influencing the other trait. In case of oil content, what happens is when erucic acid is high, oil content is high. That is because it has 22 carbon. Okay, or erucic acid. But when you reduce the erucic acid, your oleic acid is going to increase because you are blocking the pathway of FAU1. There your oil content will be low. The reason being you are converting the 22 carbon to 18 carbon. Mass is getting reduced, and they are the building block of triglycerol. Oil content is oil bodies, and fatty acids is the backbone of that. When 50% of your fatty acids are erucic acid, that we have made it 0 completely and made it to 18, then your mass is going to be reduced because they become the building block for the oil bodies. Oil mass is going to be increased. We have identified what are the QTLs in the background of low erucic acid, what are the QTL that you need to manipulate under the high erucic acid, and which parents are going to give you the best allele for that. That also we have identified, and now this work is going to start. What we want to do is, we have got the canola quality mastered, we want to incorporate white rust resistance into that. Pyramid, 2 types trace and treat. And for the seed size and the oil content, we want to breed for that, higher oil content. Mustard mein oil content is the, there are some people, they misguide you. They say if you breed for high seed size, your oil content will increase. It is a misnomer. It is a misnomer. There is no relation between seed size and the oil content. You have to breed for, because breeding for oil content is a very, very difficult task. Because seed weight, bold seed, it is a highly heritable character. It's a low hanging fruit we have harnessed. Bold, we have now got this Brassica juncea variety which are 7 grams 1000 seed weight. But oil content is less than 40. We should increase. If you see all the European countries or the Canadian, they have never put any emphasis on the seed size. they have put emphasis on the oil content because that is going to give you the higher yield because oil is your economic product. So you increase the oil content. So we have started some work on the increasing the oil content also. So that's all for today. Any question? काफी टाइम ले लिया आप लोगों का. Any question that you want to ask?
We are giving emphasis on seed colors. Giving emphasis on
Seed color.
Is there any special significance with black or yellow color?
You know, yellow is a preferred seed color. Forget about the color of the oil. That will be more transparent. Looking will be very nice looking. But less fiber when it is a yellow seed coat color. And the protein that are in the oil cake, it will be easily digestible by the as a feed, you know, if you want to use it. So that is another criteria to bring seed coat color as a quality trait. Any other question?
What's the
Hmm?
So what the exact procedure you used for the combination of the different biparental population? Is your QTL is mapped separately or in the different this one or what's the exact procedure you have?
You know, you have a one biparental population. There is one parent is suppose X. Okay, X and Y. You made a biparental population. Then you make another biparental population, do the QTL analysis independent. In that, suppose Y is common between first and the second. Okay. Similarly, third population, suppose Y and Z, you have made second population. Z could be in the common in the other one. So they have been networked in the sense their allelic status, it should be easier for you. Suppose you don't get a QTL at a particular position in population 1, but you got in the 2. If X and Y was involved in the first and Y is also involved in the second one, first one you didn't get. That means there is no allelic difference between X and Y. That's why you didn't detect a QTL. When you take it Y with Z, you got a QTL. What was the effect of the each alleles in that? You can bring together beautifully, you can work out, estimate, you have to do it and find out which is the best alleles in that.
Sir, how to validate these QTLs?
How valid?
How to validate these QTLs? Means
You can't validate a priori, you can't do anything. It is the way that will guide a breeder which allele should be transferred from which parent. You have to, ultimately QTL is a thing that is totally unpredictable in their effect in a new background. As I told you, there could be also context dependency. Here in glucosinolate, I know the pathway, so that's why I was able to find it out. But if you to go for a yield traits, even if the pathway genes are not known, or nobody has make out a pathway of that one very precisely, then what will be the output? You have to first transfer it and see the effect. That's why we always play safe when you want to transfer a QTL. We always take a big QTL. Big QTL in the sense, phenotypic variance explained by that QTL is 30%, 40%, something like that. At least you should be harnessing some positive effect when you transfer it. That is where minor QTL we have not been able to really do anything about that.
thank you, sir.
Okay. Any question?
So regarding white rust resistance, to convert all the susceptible promising varieties into resistant, can't we go for techniques like cisgenesis?
You can go for cisgenesis, but here the natural source is available. Why to go for that? You know, I am a plant breeder and also a geneticist, trained from this institute. Wherever there is a natural source of variation is available, I will never go for these elite techniques. Please. I will only go, even if tomorrow you can say CRISPR case, mutate a gene at a particular target. If I will still think twice if the natural variation is available with me.
Where also we use gene from same species. means in cisgenesis we go for gene from the same species only, sir. Means time period will be reduced if you go for this.
भाई इतना इजी मेथड आपके हाथ में पड़ा हुआ है, क्रॉस बनाओ, आप ट्रांसफर करो, आप इसको जीन को आइसोलेट करोगे, फिर आप ट्रांसफर करोगे बाय सिसजेनेसिस मेथड. यू मीन टू से दैट व्हाई टू गो फॉर दैट? आपके लिए कितना बढ़िया बढ़िया लैब चाहिए. कभी ऐसी चला जाएगा, कभी लैब फेलियर मार जाएगा, फील्ड आपको इट विल नॉट, दो चैम्बर इज नॉट गोइंग टू फेल यू. Okay, you know, there are many things are there. That's why I have seen the pros and cons of both the things. So I will always prefer if I have a natural genetic variation. And moreover, natural genetic variation has seen the test of the time. Evolutionarily, if that trait is sustaining in a particular germplasm, it is not going to fail you any time in the future. Rather than trying a new method, you create it, you transfer it. Here, of course, in cisgenesis, you can take the gene and try to put it. Where it is going to put it? Position effect, if you want to put it. Here it is the same. By recombination, by homologous recombination, you are transferring. It is in the same position, it is going to be incorporated. So I would always prefer. But some people can differ with me. But I would prefer this one. If the trait is available in the natural germplasm, I will follow the conventional method. Only thing is that I can make use of marker to hasten my breeding method. Okay.